Right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ed Dialazzo. I'm Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services. We're going to go ahead and get started with our community forum. We want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. This is a community forum on special education. We're going to go for about an hour and a half today. So again, thank you for joining us. Before I start and go through some of the logistics of what we plan on doing, I do want to introduce some folks, and they're both new to Pleasanton Unified School District, and this will be an opportunity for most of you to meet them for the first time. So I want to introduce Mr. Ken Gokin, and Ken is our Senior Director of Special Education, and he just joined us this week, and we hope to have him here and go through some of the questions and talk to all of you today. I also want to introduce Jenny Ricard, and Jenny is our Assistant Director of Special Education. She's a veteran here. She's been here for about a month now. So she's here to join us as well and go through some of the questions. I also want to introduce Patrick Gannon. Patrick is our Public Information Officer, and he is going to help us drive the presentation today and any technical issues that we have. So thanks again for joining us. The purpose of the meeting today is really to go through the question and answers that came from the town hall. And so essentially this is an extension of the town hall meeting that we had last month, and that was July 13th. And so we'll go through some of the questions from that meeting, but also we will take some new questions. We will take some questions tonight through the Q&A function on our Zoom format here. But then we'll also talk about some questions that have come up since school has started. So hopefully we have an opportunity to answer some old questions, some current questions, and then some questions that you all have that you can post again on the question and answer. So that's really our purpose for tonight, is to go through some of those questions and provide some answers for you. So after I talk, then I'll turn it over to Ken and Jenny, and then they can go through the Q&A, again, like I said, from that old town hall meeting. Then we'll review some questions after that. Any unanswered questions that we don't get to tonight that you've posted on the Q&A, then we will definitely gather those questions, and then we will provide that out as soon as we can answer them and post them. So as Patrick mentioned, the meeting is recorded. If some of you are unable to participate today, you'll have this recording available. We will post this recording onto the website. Okay, so that's kind of the logistics of it. Before Ken and Jenny start, I do just want to remark on the hard work that has been happening. Some of it behind the scenes and some of it front and center from our staff. And so there really is no manual of how to do remote learning. We're all kind of learning together, literally. And so I just want to thank our teachers, our special education teachers, our para-educators, our service providers, our specialists, all working on behalf of our kids and in service of our kids. So I do really want to just take the opportunity to thank all of them, and also all of our principals and administrators on site who are guiding the work and really trying to put all the pieces together as best as we can so that we can provide services for our students. And then with that, I do want to make sure that I thank all of you, parents and guardians, for your collaboration. We just could not do it without you, obviously. This is a unique circumstance. We're all learning together, as I said, but we really can't do it without a partnership and a collaboration between our staff, our teachers, our paraeducators, principals, and with all of you. So I just want to thank you, really take this opportunity to say that and thank you. So we continue to learn together. We continue to learn some new laws, some new guidance, some new regulations or requirements that we have to follow from Alameda County Public Health, from the CDE. So we continue to try and gather that information as best as we can and also as fast as we can. Because our job is to gather that information and then communicate it out in a timely manner. So when procedures change, just know that we are here to gather it and then provide that information to our staff so then they can provide it to all of you. But that sometimes takes time. That does take some gathering, some analysis, and then how do we convey this information out to our parent community. So thank you for your hard work, but also thank you for your patience as we work through all of this together, like I said, in service of our students. Okay, thank you for allowing me to kind of open up our meeting today. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ken Gokin, our new Senior Director of Special Education, and then he can go through this next part of the presentation. So Ken, if you could take it from here.
Next slide, please. So our first section is on implementing the IEP, the Individual Education Plan. Next slide. Next. So the question was, how will IEPs be implemented in remote learning? So the offer of free and appropriate public education, what we call FAPE, is written for each individual student for in-person schooling. So the IEPs will not be amended for remote learning because we want to be sure that the IEPs are in place when the offer of FAPE and we return to in-person learning, hopefully as soon as the governor and the powers that be allow us. So IEP goals are going to remain the same. However, there are some exceptions. So for instance, if there's an IEP goal that was addressing when the student is out at recess or lunch or during assemblies or out in PE with the whole class or things like that, we do not have a recess setting. So that skills we're going to need to be addressed differently. So keep that in mind. The other pieces, accommodations, may be different in remote learning. So for instance, if a student required an FM system in the classroom, we wouldn't be providing an FM system online. Instead, there may be a closed captioning put in place. And so those were some accommodations may need to be modified to meet the needs of the students' individual learning model and disabilities. Next slide.
And before you move forward, I just want to remind people in case they're just jumping on now. So we're going to go through these questions and Q&A, but if you have any new questions, please use that Q&A format or function, as I mentioned earlier. So just want to make sure that people have the opportunity to ask any new questions that may come up in that format. So that should be, correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, that should be on the function for the participants to access.
You're correct, Ed, and we've already gotten a couple of questions I've answered.
Okay, perfect. And then after the presentation, we will go through some of those new questions. So, okay, thank you, Ken. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so Ken and I are going to be switching off back and forth. So the next section of talking about how IEPs will be implemented in remote learning, we do have some new state law. SB 98 dictates the number of instructional minutes that are required in a school day. And so self-contained special education classes, those are going to comport with the same number of instructional minutes that are provided for general education classes at the same grade level. And for those self-contained special education classes, the instructional minutes, similar to in-person learning, are going to be fulfilled with a combination of direct instruction, so synchronous instruction with the teacher, as well as periods of independent student work. Now, there are services provided by personnel who are not the teacher of record. So for example, in the elementary setting, we might have an elementary resource specialist or a speech pathologist, or at the high school, we might have a student in that receives DHH services. So services by personnel who aren't the teacher of record, those services are going to be provided in a direct instruction format in accordance with the minutes that have been consented to on the IEP to the greatest extent possible.
And then Senate Bill 98 also requires distance learning plans, which we call DLP. So one more abbreviation, acronym, I'm sorry about that. Special ed is full of them. So distance learning plans are created to describe how services will be provided during the remote learning time. And the district will continue to monitor the state and federal requirements for instructional minutes and IEP implementation and update our procedures as needed. Next slide, please.
A very common question is whether or not IEP services can be conducted in person. And the answer is no, not at this time. All services will be provided at this point through remote direct instruction. Next slide.
And so will related services such as speech or OT, occupational therapy, be scheduled during synchronous instruction. So all IEP services will continue to be provided during the student's instructional day, which is roughly 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. daily, Monday through Friday. Service providers will make attempts to minimize the amount of direct synchronous classroom instruction that is missed in order to access related services, just as we do during the regular school day in person. Next slide, please.
Several parents have wondered whether or not adjustments to the IEP or 504 plan, whether those can be made or whether they need to be made due to remote learning that we're in right now. So just a reminder that IEPs and 504 plans are always adjustable. They are living documents that can be adjusted at any point based on student needs. However, in remote learning, we don't have to modify IEPs and 504 plans simply because of the remote learning situation. That's why SB 98 calls for a DLP, the distance learning plan, that addresses how the IEP is to be implemented in the remote learning scenario. Teams can discuss the DLP as part of an IEP meeting, and we are continuing to hold IEP meetings. But the DLP it does not take the place of an IEP document. It is not an IEP document. It doesn't require parental consent because it's just a form of information about how the services look different in a remote setting versus in person. Next slide.
Okay, how can I request a 504 IEP meeting? An IEP meeting is not required in the hybrid or the flex at home models. It can be requested by parents at any time. So all students who have selected the long-term independent study or the LTS must have an IEP to review the LTIS program and the implications for the students. So to request an IEP meeting, send your written request to your child's case manager or the school administrator, and we still have to maintain a 30-day timeline and hold the IEP meeting within that time frame. So another option is parent-teacher conferences to discuss the DLP, the distance learning plans that are created to describe how services will be provided in remote learning. And the district will continue to monitor state and federal requirements for instructional minutes and IEP implementation and update our procedures as needed. And next slide.
Does SB 98 require emergency language in the IEP? So many of you have either read state law, the SB 98, or you've heard that there are some requirements now for IEP language that might be different than before. And remote learning and our COVID situation certainly feels like an emergency. It feels like a never-ending, ongoing emergency. However, the law defines what an emergency is. It says that an emergency is a situation where instruction or services can't be provided to students either in person or remotely for more than 10 school days. So this is different. In the spring, when we were suddenly in shelter in place, school was closed. And so we were in an emergency situation. However, currently, we are not in an emergency situation because school is in session and we are providing instruction and services. An example of when an emergency condition would exist might be a fire situation, a wildfire, where an entire community is evacuated and services and instruction cannot be provided to students. So that's an example of the type of situation that we're looking at for this language in the IEP. Emergency language does not have to be added in a special IEP meeting. We don't have to convene an IEP for every student to add this language. It's going to happen naturally at the next time an IEP meeting would naturally come around. So you don't need to worry about trying to reach out to the case manager to schedule something to get that language into the IEP. Next slide.
Okay, so what mental health supports are there for students with special needs? So all students have access to our social emotional learning opportunities that are offered within the district, that including general education counseling, social work, etc. On our website, if you visit the Pleasanton Unified School District website, multiple resources are available to our community, and the link is there for you to see in a screenshot. And so please do look at that and see all that is available within the school district and within our community during these trying times. IEP services for eligible individuals, students are also available. We have our psychologists, our mental health psychologists, our mental health clinicians, all that are working and providing services as required on each student's IEP in the area of counseling and mental health. Next slide, please.
Can I just add on to here, if you stay there, Patrick? So there's been a lot of information definitely out there for us to review, and especially the reality that, you know, kids are social beings and human beings are social beings. And so this is something that we're taking very seriously, and we want to make sure that we're providing not only the resources that are available within our school district, but also how do we identify kids who may be in need of additional mental health supports. So those are the things that we're talking to with not just our staff, but also our school counselors, our social workers, our school psychologists, people who work with our kids, albeit remotely. But how can we identify and make sure that students are continuing to be engaged, doing the work that they are being asked to do, but also what are some of those sort of things that we can look out for our kids. Of course, all of you can reach out to us, to your school sites, to your counselors and case managers or administrators, and let us know if there's anything that we can do to support a student who may have some social emotional needs that we're not seeing. But I just want to reiterate and just really emphasize that this is very important to us, and we understand in this new world of instruction, you know, this time in the year, 3 weeks in, we would have seen our kids, we're getting to know them, we're kind of getting to see how they act and react and how they behave with other kids in the class. I mean, that's all part of teaching and learning, is that we're doing that now. But it's a different way of us kind of seeing that and analyzing that. So we're here to support and help as best as we can. And please reach out to us if you feel like we need you, if your student needs some extra support. But anyway, I just want you to know that all of our staff are very aware and watching as best as we can how to support our kids. Okay, thank you.
Okay, there were several questions at the town hall about workability and ROP programs, wondering how those are going to be provided in remote learning. So for workability, typically what that program does is it works with high school students, adult transition students, adult education students, taking them out into the community and having some targeted work opportunities. So obviously things are different right now in remote learning. And so the workability staff is not able to provide on-site work site instruction. However, I met with the workability staff, I believe it was last week. The days are just flying by. Last week, and we talked about things that can be provided in remote learning. So career assessments can still be completed. We can do virtual job shadowing. We can still work on developing the work skills that are needed, whether or not those are kind of the soft skills, the social skills that are required in a professional environment, or whether those are, you know, direct work skills. I want to apologize right now to Jamie Renton. I have misspelled her first name, Jamie. Jamie Renton is our head of workability. And if you have specific questions related to the workability program, please feel free to email her. And then ROP, Ed, would you mind actually talking about this bullet point or these bullet points, please?
Sure, absolutely. So our ROP classes are actually held at the high schools. And so for those particular classes, they will follow the same campus bell schedule and instructional minutes as they would being on campus. So the assignments are all virtual. They're following those schedules, as I mentioned. The important thing here is right now, the travel and the intern placements that some of our students are able to participate in who are in ROP, all of that is on hold at this point. So kind of similar to the workability program, ROP classes are happening. They are happening remotely, virtually, and assignments again are completed that way. But in terms of the placements for on-the-job training, it's not happening at this point. So when we get back into some level of in-person learning, then all of this will change as well. But that's what I know about what's happening with the ROP classes.
Okay, next slide, please. So our next question was about how IEPs are going to be signed. Our SACE system, where IEPs are at within the case information, SACE does not allow for online signatures. And so we are currently trying to work with vendors on identifying electronic document formats in order for us to get signatures electronically. So what we will be doing is the case manager, the district will be sending that signature page home to the ed rights holder. And we can send that either through the US mail or through email, depending on his or her or their preferences. And then the ed rights holder will sign and return the forms, the signature page. And he or she can do this by emailing it back using the US mail, or they can even take a picture with their phone and then email it back to us that way. So we are very flexible on how we will send and receive back the signature page. We just need to make sure that it's actually signed in order to have consent to move forward on implementing the IEP. So that is our plan, and we'll continue to work with a vendor to see if we can set up an electronic signature. Next page.
That page just details some of what Ken just said.
Yes.
All right, so then the next batch of questions have to do with assessments. Now, I know in this format, it's a little bit artificial because we're starting with, by categorizing the questions that we received previously. You may have questions that are coming up in response to the answer that we have provided. So we definitely will be circling back to the prior topics as we're going through your questions from this live webinar. But for now, we'll move on to questions that came to us about assessments. So next slide. Okay, so the plan for conducting assessments we will be assessing our students. So that's the main thing that you need to know. The federal government is the only one who would be able to authorize any differences in that. The requirement for assessment is an IDEA requirement, and there have been no requests to Congress for any waivers in this respect. And we believe that assessment is, it's at the very beginning of what we need for all of our students to figure out what their needs are for special education. So as such, we will be assessing all of our students who require assessment. Now that being said, as you can imagine, because of the spring, we have quite a large backlog of assessments. And so we have to approach assessment strategically. And so we've talked with our teams to prioritize assessments so that we know how we should proceed in getting those assessments completed. And I believe the next slide talks about that a little bit more.
Yeah, so our first priority is to conduct our initial assessments for students being considered for eligibility for the first time, and completion of assessments that had already started in the spring of 2020. Our second priority will be assessments for students who have already have an IEP, but for whom additional areas of suspected disability are being explored. So for instance, a student has a speech-only IEP, but is being assessed for a suspected learning disability. And so this can be in any of the 13 eligibility areas. And then our third priority is the new triennial assessments. And so that's what we're structuring, what we're prioritizing in order to complete all of our assessments as soon as possible, and working with you, the family, and the student in order to get that done. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in-person versus distance learning assessments. Next slide.
Yeah, just a quick comment on the previous topic of prioritization. Those are just guidelines that we have used to help our teams to prioritize. Certainly there are individual situations that may not fit there, and so this is an individualized process, but it was helpful for our teams to have some kind of structure in place to start prioritizing those assessments. The next topic is about learning loss. And what we mean by that is that students may have fallen behind in their learning because of shelter in place, and kind of the differences that might have existed in what each student was able to access during the spring. And then from the spring, we went right into the summertime, where we already know that there's going to be a summer slide and maybe some learning loss that's going to take place. And we always plan in the beginning of every school year to spend a couple of weeks reviewing and getting our students caught back up. But we do anticipate that learning loss is going to be more widespread this year, and our teachers and you are already seeing that right now. The difference is that being maybe a little bit behind in terms of grade level expectations because of the COVID situation and because of learning loss is pretty different. It's very different from having a disability that impacts learning, whether or not we are in remote learning or in in-person learning. So special education is for students that do have a disability that require those supports and services. So this year, as usual, teachers' first days and weeks of instruction are going to be dealing with that learning loss. And we know that some students are going to be able to catch up sooner than others. So it's really important that parents are aware that there are intervention and support systems in place at the general education classroom level that do not require special education testing and eligibility and things like that. So be sure to keep in communication with your child's teacher if you are just concerned about learning loss and the progress in the first days and weeks of the school year. But as always, if you do suspect that your child might have a disability that requires special education assessment, absolutely get in contact with your child's teacher and the school administrator to request what's called a student study team meeting. Now, this forum is for families, or designed for families whose children already are on IEPs, but we may have some parents here whose children might be struggling but are not yet in special education. So the student studies team process is designed as a general education function that parents and teachers and administrators can come together and brainstorm what some of the reasons might be for students to be struggling, and to determine some interventions that can take place within general education. So you can always request a student study team meeting at your school site. And I think that's it about learning loss. We will not be conducting special education assessments due to learning loss, but we definitely acknowledge it is a concern, and we're dealing with it district-wide. Next slide.
Okay, so the next question was, how will assessments be provided? And so a single method of assessing a student may not work in every situation, and every student is different in the situation at their home and learning environment. So here's some possibilities for the completion of assessments. We have remote assessments, and the district is procuring the Presence Learning Platform, and this will be allow us to conduct our psychoeducational, our academic, our speech and language, occupational therapy assessments online with video conferencing. And so what we would do is have our assessor on one end online and on camera, and then the student being assessed on the other, and then working on, if necessary, a document camera to be able to show the work the questions that are being answered or written down by the students. So we have that online present learning platform. The other is observations. Evaluators can observe students during their synchronous direct instruction, and also in small group sessions and breakout sessions online in the online classroom. There's also the records review. So students who have had consistent assessments demonstrating stable functioning in one or more domains may not require reassessment in those areas, and may require only partial assessment in specific domains. And so if the IEP team agrees that a records review would be sufficient, then that can be done instead of the full triennial assessment. Rating scales. So many assessments rely on parent and teacher interviews and or completion of rating scales, and these can be mailed to your home and returned to the evaluator for scoring and interpretation, just as was done in person. So
Go to the next slide, Patrick, so that parents can follow along. Yeah.
And then in-person assessment, and I sent out an email to all of our staff. We do have some staff members and families who have mutually agreed upon to do in-person assessment. And so the California and Alameda County Public Health Department have provided guidance, as well as district protocols and procedures, and every site is set up for that. And I sent that out to staff today in an email. And so if the staff member and the family are in agreement, then the student can be brought to school, and there's procedures to go through, a checklist to ensure that for the COVID-19 checklist, there is a health checklist there in order to do, and also equipment, and we have the plexiglass to separate the assessor and the student, to social distancing in a well-ventilated classroom building or building on the campus, and face masks. All that are available and part of the guidelines that was sent out to staff, if that is a mutually agreed upon between the two. So those are our various areas and ways that we can continue to provide assessments to our students and families. Next slide.
So not only how are assessments going to be provided, but when are we going to start? So of course, we talked about the prioritization of assessments, and so that is being considered right now. The site teams are looking at their rosters of students and going through that process of trying to kind of put them in order of who needs to be assessed first. There are certain things that can happen right now. So observations can happen right now because students are experiencing synchronous instruction. And so, so our service providers can also hop on a Zoom link and observe students in their educational environment. Record reviews can also occur because we have electronic, I almost said medical records, electronic school records, where we can go back and review IEPs and documents from years past. And then also the rating scales can be mailed to parents, and that can start happening right now. To talk a little bit more about the remote assessments and that presence learning platform, the purchase or the licensing for that platform has finally been finalized. It occurred yesterday. And so now we are in the process of making sure that we have everything we need for onboarding and training. So things always move a little bit slower than we want them to, and it can seem like things take forever, but we really are getting there with our ability to provide those remote assessments. So the training, you should be hearing from service providers that they are starting to receive that training in the very near future, days and into next week. And then also we think that communication is super important. So we want you to be hearing from your team. So either your teacher or your speech therapist or your school psychologist, someone on your child's team as a spokesperson can be communicating with you about a tentative timeline for completing your child's assessment. If it's okay, I'd actually like to go back a slide and do a little bit of clarification on this last slide. We've had a lot of a lot of discussions and kind of going back and forth about in-person assessments. So it is true that the state of California, as well as our county public health department, they are not forbidding in-person interaction with students, especially those who have circumstances like they have special needs and they need to have their assessments done, or vision and hearing screenings, right? There are certain things that just can't be done remotely, and the law and the public health guidance from our county does not prevent or does not forbid those in-person assessments from happening. However, in PUSD, we are not there yet. We have certainly planned. We have developed plans and practices that we would like to see implemented. We have procured PPE and supplies, but we are not there yet in terms of having a district-wide protocol that is rolled out yet. So I did want to be a little bit more detailed on that. And Ken and I are both new, but since I've been around about a month longer than Ken, I have the history on that. And Ed, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
No, I think that's good. Really, the issue is that we're getting some guidance. You know, we're kind of processing that guidance. It's been allowed. You know, prior to today, it's been allowed for maybe a week now, a week or so. It's just new information is coming, and we want to make sure that we have all the right information so that we can go through our current practice and our protocol and then give out some guidance. I know Ken provided some guidance today, but we just kind of want to leave this with all of you that we're still, you know, kind of analyzing the information and then coming up with some pretty specific guidance here for our staff in the near future. So I think, thank you, Jenny, for clarifying that a little bit. I know this one is one of those sort of confusing items that we're still trying to analyze and make sure we provide the correct guidance. So thank you.
So I think now we're to the slide titled Expectations. There we go.
Yes, and the first question under expectations, the next slide, please, is what will be expected of teachers and service providers in remote learning. And so the expectation from the federal government is that we want as close as possible as we move from in-school learning last March to remote learning now. We're using the same state-approved curriculum, the same Common Core standards, you know, the same academic rigor. California law, Senate Bill 98, and the resulting changes in California Ed Code have provided clear requirements for instructional minutes during this remote learning period, and what constitutes, quote, an instructional day, end quote, and how many, quote, instructional days are required in a school year, and how student attendance must be documented as well. So the district must develop a plan for tiered engagement, re-engagement of students who are absent for more than 60% of their instructional days in a school week. So if a student misses more than 60% of the instructional time during a school week, we have developed a tiered re-engagement plan for those students. Our expectation is also that our teachers and service providers are providing instruction in accordance with all applicable laws, including synchronous, which is face-to-face virtual teaching and intervention services. Next slide.
So we're back to another communication piece. Do the teachers know what the expectations are? And the answer is yes. The teachers and the service providers have been educated about, and you can read the bullet list there of just a few of the topics that we have had education for our teachers and service providers. That being said, I know that our teachers and our service providers are working harder than they have ever worked before under circumstances that are different than they've ever been before, which stimulates adrenaline and cortisol in your brain. And sometimes when you hear information once and you hear it under a stressful situation, sometimes the message is not entirely absorbed. Not that our teachers or service providers, you know, don't know that they're supposed to provide education and services for the students, but what I'm getting at here is that our communication needs to be clear, and it needs to be done more than one time. So if as many times as we need to communicate with as many different groups of staff as needed, we are going to do that. And as questions come up, we are here for our staff and our service providers to try to shed some clarity and shed some light on the confusing and overwhelming demands of what's being asked of them right now. But I do want you families to know that our teachers and service providers are definitely aware of the requirements for the minutes of instructional time that our students need to have. They know that we need to provide devices and connectivity for our students, as well as for our staff. We need to make sure that all of our staff also have good connectivity so that they can provide services. The rigor needs to be equivalent to in-person instruction, that we are providing supports and services for struggling students in general education, as well as those with identified disabilities. We're continuing to provide English language development for our English learners. And then there are additional procedures in place now for tracking of attendance and making sure that our students are engaged and participating. So those are just some of the things that we've been working with our teachers and service providers for. Next slide.
So the next question that came from our question and answer is, what processes are in place to ensure that my child's IEP or 504 services are delivered and being delivered by the service providers? And so an IEP or a 504 provides accountability. We also have the digital learning plans that every educator is submitting to ensure that we're following through on providing rigorous instruction and meeting the IEP services and 504 services as documented in each plan or IEP. And administration is monitoring delivery of instruction services. And so at the last board meeting, our superintendent had talked a little bit about that, about how he had been in many classes and continues to visit many classes along with our other district administrators and our site administrators, just as in person, where we would do walkthroughs and visit the sites. Administration at all levels continues to monitor the delivery of instruction services on this new digital format as well. And progress monitoring through the IEP will continue to occur and can be used to determine the student's growth. So we'll continue to measure every goal written for the student in his or her IEP, and provide the data and report out to parents and guardians on that as well. So next slide, please.
Actually, I want to add a couple of things. Can you guys go? Yeah. Patrick. So just a couple of things. So we know what we want to do, right? We want our students to receive the services that they're entitled to based on their IEPs and their 504s. So we do know that, as I said earlier, this continues to be a time of learning and collaborating and problem solving those challenges that come up. So I want to be just realistic that when issues come up, we need to have a process of how we resolve those issues. And so I just want to reiterate that the first place to go is always going to be your child's teacher. So talk with your child's teacher. Students with IEPs, each student with an IEP has a case manager, IEP case manager. Could be different from the classroom teacher depending on grade level. So those are the first folks that you want to talk to. The next group of people will definitely be your site administrators. So we constantly provide information to our principals, our vice principals, and they know that we have expectations for them to make sure that they monitor how services are being delivered. And if they're not, then they should know about it. Then of course we have our program specialists. These are our district office people. So our program specialists, and then also Jenny and Ken are our administrators in special education. And of course me, you can call me, contact me for if you have any concerns. But I'm gonna always try and push it back and say like, hey, what's going on at the site level? Because that's really where things are happening. So I just want to kind of put that out there, that is the process of how to resolve some of these issues. If you're feeling like, you know, there's a question that I have, hey, I'm not really being notified of something, I disagree with something, you know, I want to make sure that you all have that process in mind of how we do that, just to make sure that we're all, again, aware of the issues, and then once we are aware of the issues, that we try to resolve them as best as we can. Okay, so thank you. Next page, Patrick.
Okay, so the next question is, I can read it one of two ways. How can parents be expected to provide IEP accommodations and supports? Because with that kind of reading, that was actually what I heard out of the parent survey. Very early in July when I arrived here, one of my first tasks was to look through the survey responses that many of you completed. And the question was, you know, do you feel like you need additional training, or parents, is there anything that we can provide for you to assist in this new role that you have of being your child's teacher and support provider? And so there were a lot of responses, and the sentiment from many of you was, this is really, really hard. And we want you to know that we hear you, that it is hard for so many reasons, not just that, that supporting students can be hard, but parents are in a different role right now. They're being asked to fulfill multiple roles. And we acknowledge that it can be difficult in and of itself, let alone the requirements of working yourself, having other children that have all different needs, etc. So we definitely know that this is kind of a hot button issue. That being said, we really want to support you. We do have some specialized knowledge. That's why we are special educators, and we want to be able to give you some of that knowledge and give you some of that support so that things go well at home in this remote learning situation. So we want you to reach out to your teachers and to your specialists in this time, and with some specific questions or needs. How can I do this, or how can I provide this support for my student? So communicating those challenges is really important. And it may be that in that communication, we find that there are some different accommodations and different supports that need to be written into the distance learning plan in order to make some adjustments in this time period. So, you know, an example might be closed captioning. So it was fine when we were in the classroom, but now, you know, my student can't listen and can't take notes at the same time. And so we may be able to provide some additional accommodations to support. And that's just one example, but we want you to communicate with your teachers and service providers to allow us to support you and to help you in this time. And next slide.
Okay, upon return to in-person learning, next slide, please. We are going to continue to follow federal, state, and Alameda County guidelines and requirements, and work with all of the agencies and the governmental agencies, and follow what is required and asked, and work with our district and our board and all of our stakeholders. And now we're focusing on communication about the most immediate issues facing our students and staff during this remote learning time. And we've talked a little bit about some of those things, including the digital learning plan and other aspects. And as we get closer to our return, we're going to keep parents and staff. We're going to provide them with advance notice to ensure that preparations can be made by all of our stakeholders when that time does come, and we are able to welcome everyone back to our campuses. So currently we're ordering personal protective equipment and furniture and accessories to be able to meet the in-person demand and needs of all of our students and stakeholders when that time does come. Next slide, please.
That is the last slide.
Yes, that's the last slide.
So I think Ed will take it from here and kind of guide us through the next portion of our meeting.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, you guys, Ken and Jenny, for going through those questions. And for those of you who may have joined us late, those are the questions that came from the virtual town hall about a month ago. And so we wanted to make sure that we took this opportunity to answer those questions. And we were able to do it in this format. So want to appreciate all of you for the questions, and to Mr. Gokin and Mr. Ricard for answering. All right, so now for this portion of the meeting, I'm just kind of looking at the clock. We have about 30 minutes, and we have right now 28 questions. And so I think we have time to go through each one of the questions. But as I said earlier, if we're unable to answer a question at this moment, we'll make sure to cut and paste. And I know Patrick can help us with this. He can make sure that we capture all the questions and then put it in another format that we can answer them on paper, just so all the questions that have been posed can be answered. So at this point, what I'd like to do is read every question. I think, again, we have enough time, and we can go through these questions live. And so I'm just going to read them as they're written. And Jen and Ken, if you could help me answer some of these questions, that would be great. So we can go through the next section of our presentation that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and start reading. With the new county guidance yesterday of allowing special needs kids on campus, are they moving forward with this? I think I could answer that. So yes, so we are aware that there is new guidance. I believe, God, I don't have it in front of me. It had something to do with small group cohorts, I believe is probably what they titled it, where they are now allowing that to happen. So with that new information, that's one of those things as a district now we have to plan and how to do that. So thank you for the question. Yes, we are aware that that is a possibility, and now we just have to determine how we can do that as a local district. Okay, so stay tuned for that. And again, as I said it earlier, things are changing quickly, and we want to make sure that we have the right information prior to us acting on it and implementing. Okay, question 2. Could you give us some examples of how the services for, let's say, socialization at recess will be met?
I can certainly respond to that.
Go ahead.
So whenever we have a goal on an IEP, the way that that goal is written is depending on a student need that was identified through our assessment or our data collection. And so for a particular need, let's say peer socialization, we could write a variety of different goals. The team perhaps proposed one that was at recess because that at the school environment, that's one of the main times that a student would have socialization with a peer, an opportunity for that. So in distance learning, that goal might not be able to be worked on in the same way, but the need is still there. So we back up one step and we look at the need that was identified and we figure out how that might be met in remote learning. So if the need is peer socialization, well, the student is working probably in small groups and breakout sessions on Zoom with peers, similar to the way that they would work in a small group in the classroom. And so it might be targeted in that way. It might be targeted through some work with sibling interaction, maybe. Or it might look like a whole group interaction. Or it might be in a speech therapy session where there are 2 students with the speech therapist that they're working on initiating and taking turns in a conversation that's guided by the speech therapist, but they can work on socialization in that way. So the goal is from a need, and we can still work on that need.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. The state has indicated that in-person service can be provided. The Department of Health updated guidance yesterday saying it is allowed. OAH, that's Office of Administrative Hearings, is also ordering districts to comply with this. So how does PUSD justify continuing to claim that in-person instruction cannot be provided? I think I can answer this one. So like I said, we are really working hard to gather the information. There is some new guidance, absolutely, regarding in-person service. And so we just got it, and we're learning about it and processing it. So I think I already answered this question, but I do totally understand that we can now start moving towards that in-person instruction, but following the guidance, whatever that guidance is, from our local public health, Department of Public Health. Okay, and then now what does that look like for Pleasanton? And that is working with our teachers, working with our HR office, with our business office, to make sure that we get it right when we do open. So I think that would be my answer for that at this time, is that we do have that information and we will move towards that with all the stakeholders being involved. Will triennial assessments be conducted remotely or in person?
Yes, and that will, so depending on where the student is, the assessment is assigned to the school psychologist located at that particular site, and then also the student's case manager. And as mentioned earlier, some of our assessors are choosing and wanting to do in-person assessment versus remote assessments. And so if they choose to do that, then they would contact the family, and it would need to be mutually agreed upon to do an in-person assessment, and then have that student come to our school site. And then there's also the health checklist and the other things to follow through if that's done in person. And so you would work with the assessors assigned to your child and find out what both of you and the assessors would prefer to do it online or in person, and whatever you mutually agree upon, that's how you'll move forward for your particular son or daughter.
All right, and hey, Patrick, again, I'm just going down the list. Patrick, am I doing the right thing on the Q&A?
Yeah, you're doing great.
Okay, just while going through each one. How the resource time, probably this should say, how is resource time implemented so it does not conflict with the regular class schedule?
I can take a stab at that one. So resource time, I'm assuming this is elementary resource that we're talking about. Elementary resource time often overlaps during in-person, when we're in-person school. Resource time often overlaps with regular class schedules, and students are either pulled out into a different setting, or the resource specialist might come into the classroom and pull one or more students back to a table to do a small group. There really isn't a lot of difference in that with remote learning. So resource can be implemented where the resource specialist can join the Zoom group and can use the chat feature to communicate with the student, could pull a student either individually or in a small group into a breakout session to review concepts that are being worked on. They can schedule their own Zoom instruction with the student. But, remembering that resource minutes do need to be completed directly with the student. There's no way for resource minutes just to be provided during, say, 1 to 3 o'clock when the students are not having synchronous instruction. So there will be some overlap there.
And next question, what if instructional minutes are not currently being met?
Well, the instructional minutes aren't currently being met, then yes, please reach out to your teacher and then to your case manager. And then as Ed had talked about, the next step would be to contact the site administrator and or myself. And so please do let us know, and then we could sit down and talk about that and find out what's going on and why. But yeah, the first step is the teacher of record and the case manager.
Chromebooks have limited access to some apps, which allows for engagement and interaction due to settings set by IT department. This limits the interaction between teacher and student. Can this be addressed?
That's probably a question that's not necessarily special education. And the reason I say that is because I personally don't have knowledge of which apps those might be. But I do know that there are some protocols in place by the IT department for maintaining student privacy and student safety online. Ed or Ken, can you?
Yeah, I think, you know what, like I said earlier, we'll capture these questions. If we're unable to answer it now, we'll put it in the new updated Q&A. I really, gosh, I don't know the answer to that question. It's different settings. It's an IT specific question. So we'll have to get back to all of you on that question. Okay, I'm going to move forward. Should the transition classes be receiving the same length of instruction that they would if they were attending in person? So these are our classes, our adult transition classes for our students ages 18 to 22. So do you want to answer that question, Ken and Jenny?
Transition aligns to high school. And so the transition schedules typically are aligned with a high school instructional day. But again, I am new to this district and there may be some differences. So I don't want to speak out of turn. I may need to do some research and get back to you, Ken, if you.
I would say you're right on point there, Jenny. So our adult transition classes are located on Village High School campus. And so traditionally, wherever the class is located would follow the bell schedule for that campus. So the adult transition classes would follow the same instructional day as the students at Village. This is a statement. It says some districts are using DocuSign. Yes, we are trying to determine what we can use here as a district, and DocuSign is one of the vendors that we are considering. Will this PowerPoint presentation also be available after the webinar? Yes, the answer is yes. I believe Patrick may have already posted it on the link, posted the link. So, but remember too, as I mentioned earlier, it is being recorded. We will post it on our website along with the Q&A. Sites keep refusing to answer requests for initial assessment. They are delaying the process well beyond 15 days. What guidance have we provided for them?
Yes, and so anytime that initial assessments come, what happens is the assessor will contact the parent or guardian. And so that came up in our meeting today. So for instance, in talking to the parent guardian, what are your concerns, and talking through that? You know, the school year just started. So for instance, traditionally, even in person, we often allow the students to get to know their fellow peers, to get to know the teacher, for the teacher to get to know the students, to see how they're performing at the new grade level with the new curriculum, to see where they're at. So we often do not jump right into assessments at the beginning of each new school year, but that's where the assessor will talk with the parent and find out their concerns. And if we need to move forward with the assessment, yes, we will either need to send out the assessment or decline to assess within the same timelines with IDEA. So that has not changed. Betty DeVos, in charge of the U.S. Department of Education, has not asked for any waivers. So no, we do need to stay within our timelines. Yes.
Very good. Could you speak more to the wellness program and the counseling center services providing at Foothill? Yeah, so our wellness programs are, even in the virtual world, should be up and running. So I think for this one, they would know the specifics better than me, meaning Foothill. So if you would look at the link, the live link from the district webpage and then the individual link at the high schools, you should get some information there. And then if you're unable to, if you just want to talk to somebody, one of the school counselors, your child's school counselor, can definitely talk about that program. Again, we'll try to put in more information on that, but I think it's best served if the specific people running the wellness programs can talk about it. But from what I've seen, there have been some really great things happening even remotely or virtually with our support systems for wellness. So great question. But I'll leave you to search them and talk to the people at the school site so they could talk more about the specifics of what they can provide. Next question. According to the CDE, school districts are not precluded from providing services to students with disabilities, in person or in home, for the purpose of supporting the student in accessing the alternative options for learning being offered. And district is not operating under any emergency situation. That said, there are students who are not getting the necessary supports they need to be successful in remote learning. These students include those who have one-on-one services on their IEPs. It seems the solution has been making the classes shorter for some of the moderate severe classes. How does the district plan to address this so that all students can get the same amount of instructional time as their mild, moderate, and general education peers?
And that's where the digital learning plans of all teachers have come into place, and setting those up to provide the needs. And we're also on the same bell schedule. So whether whatever site you're at, whether the student has mild to moderate disabilities or moderate severe, the instructional minutes are the same based on for that school and that particular grade level. So there shouldn't be a difference in instructional times for mild to moderate versus moderate to severe placements at the same grade level at the same school site.
Yeah, I would have to say I've had the opportunity to visit some of our classrooms here in the first couple of weeks of school, and at least the two classes that I visited, moderate severe at the elementary level, it was pretty much the same time that is required. Not pretty much, it was the same time that was required for the bell schedule at that particular grade level and at that school. So if that is happening, again, let the teacher know so that we can make adjustments, because it should be followed with the same instructional time, whether it's mild, moderate class, a moderate, severe classroom, or the general ed classroom. So thank you for that question.
And if I could add a little bit onto that response as well, just talking to the one-to-one service on the IEP, I'm assuming that the person asking this question is referring to a paraprofessional that provides support, all through the day for a student. And obviously, we're not doing that in the student's home. We have several vacancies for paraprofessionals, and we are working diligently to fill those positions. One-to-one support from those paraprofessionals does look different in remote learning than it does in in-person learning, obviously. And to be honest, we're still figuring out how that looks and what it looks like for each individual student. Some students might need to use the chat with the paraprofessional, and that's all that's needed. Some might need a lot more than that. Some, the differences of what students need are quite significant. So we're still, working that out. Each case manager, each teacher does direct the paraprofessionals in what their activities should be with students. And so I would encourage parents, if they're not sure how the support person, even if it's not a one-to-one, if it's just the classroom support aides, how they are supporting the students. The teachers are the ones directing them and can answer those types of questions. But do please understand we're still also figuring out the best ways to provide that service.
Right, the number of questions keep growing, so we do have only a few more minutes. We'll go till 4:30 and maybe a little bit after, but I'll try to go through these quickly. Okay, Ken and Jenny?
Yes.
Let's see, we currently have a substitute teacher. Who should we expect to hear from since we have a substitute teacher at this time? You should be hearing from the classroom teacher, whether it's a substitute, you should be hearing from them. So I don't have the school But that question I would have the principal take on because, yeah, you should be hearing from anybody who's in charge of our classrooms. California Department of Public Health released a guidance regarding the in-person supervision, cohorts of children or youth in educational childcare settings. This includes small group learning for students with special needs. Can our district move forward into looking into opening special day classes which fall under this guidance? So we answered this earlier. So yes, we are looking forward to determine, again, what that order says. I believe the order says that direct instruction is not allowed, but supports for students with special needs is allowed. That's again coming from memory. So we just need to look at what that order says, what is allowable, and then how we do that. And then we will proceed with providing those services that again are allowed by the county public health. So that question has come up a couple of times, so thank you.
The next few questions are similar to that.
Yeah, I think the next question is the same too. Thank you.
Couple.
I think the next question is the same. When IEP service minutes exceed the minutes directed by SB 98, how is that being handled?
I'm assuming this question refers to self-contained classes where the IEP service minutes are, let's say, 360 minutes per day, and now the instructional day is less. Those IEP service minutes, we're not going to amend the IEP because those service minutes are written for in-person instruction. But during distance learning, on the distance learning plan, the DLP, those services will be provided during the duration of the instructional minutes in remote learning.
Okay. Who should we reach out to if there's a conflict between the resource schedule and the regular classroom schedule? We've talked to staff, vice principal, teacher, resource, but we haven't received information. So again, we talked about the process. Sounds like you've done so. So for anybody who has any questions, that is the route. It's the resource, or the case manager, the classroom teacher, site admins. If you have further questions, you can reach out to Ken, and we can answer the questions from up here as best as we can. Talking about Ken mentioned that staff received an email today regarding assessments in person. Was that sent? Thank you very much. So Ken, I don't know, that was kind of a statement.
Yes, I sent it out to the whole special education group, and that included our office. There are guidelines in there, and so all of the attachments from the County Office of Alameda's requirements, as well as our procedures we've already set up. So yes, that did go out to every special education certificated member and their supervisors at the school sites.
Okay, thank you. What electronic hardware might be offered remotely to students with vision issues or limited motor skills? Laptops with small screens are insufficient for students that would typically be offered academic accommodations, such as large font. Can the school district provide laptops with larger screens and touch screens features or touch screen monitors?
I can take that question. I've actually had a couple of situations like this where the devices that are at home need to be customized or modified, or we need additional hardware to support students or software. So as long as that is a need that's driven by a student's disability, for example, we would maybe put it into an IEP normally, we can put that into a DLP and we can access devices, hardware and software that are needed to support students. So I recommend, again, working with your specialists. For example, if it's for visual impairment, then there is going to be a service provider that is working with you, a teacher of the visually impaired. And we work closely with those teachers, and they just need to communicate with us. And this is the paperwork, this is what's needed for this student, and then we can procure it on our end.
Yeah, that's right. As the protocol for IEP meetings changed, our school scheduled a meeting and we did not have anybody from the district office. I would say most IEP meetings would not have anybody from the district office. It's the IEP team at the school site. I don't know the details of this particular question. If there are, some of our students in different settings may require district office personnel or representative from the district office, but most IEP meetings are going to happen just with the school site teams. So again, I don't know the other pieces of the question, but generally speaking, district office staff would not be at the IEP meetings. Other districts are including, quote, IEP goal, service to meet it, unquote, in the distance learning plans. Can we get that in Pleasanton? There seems little correlation between services listed and the actual goals.
I hate to always be the one answering. I'm sorry, Ken. So when I arrived, Mary Jude Dorpinghouse, Ken's predecessor, had already been working with our SELPA and our neighboring districts to use a consistent distance learning plan form or template. So I came in kind of midstream on that. I don't think there's any restriction in terms of being able to state specifically how IEP goals are being met and what services are provided to meet those goals. But the DLPs are not required to be as detailed or intensive as they were in the spring, because we are back in school and we are implementing the IEP. So there shouldn't need to be a lot of discussion about, which goals are we targeting. We should be targeting all of the goals, or at least all of the needs that the student has.
Thank you. And Ken's doing a great job, everybody. He's been here for 3 days, so he's doing great. So, but Jenny, thank you. You're definitely, like I said, the veteran here of special ed for the department. So thank you both. When it was mentioned that the IEP and goals will not be amended, could you clarify about annual IEP meetings and meetings for kids who are transitioning from elementary to middle school? There should be no amendments in terms of timelines. If we have an annual IEP meeting that needs to be held, we need to have that within the regular timelines. If we are holding transition meetings for our kids transitioning from different grade levels, like elementary to middle to high school to adult transition, those meetings should also be scheduled accordingly. There should be no changes to our IEP timelines for any of our IEPs.
I think what we meant in terms of IEPs will not be amended is that in shelter in place, there were districts that amended every single student's IEP to reduce minutes or to do this or that based on remote learning. And that's not what we're doing. We're keeping the IEP intact. But IEP amendments do occur for transition meetings and things like that. So yeah, under those circumstances, we would.
Could you perhaps also be able to see all the questions being asked by the parents? Oh, I'm sorry. Like I said, we will have these questions printed out and answered, but we just felt it was more efficient if we did it this way. But all the answer, I'm going through the list as best as I can. And I'm not skipping any questions that I'm seeing, unless they were repeats. A chat group for parents to share and get help would be great, such as hangout rooms for real-time collaboration. Statement, thank you. What type of furniture are you referring to as a form of PPEs? So really quick, we had an opportunity to visit some of our classrooms, and I actually did that visit with our procurement team, our business office, our facilities team, and we thought about specifically our moderate severe classrooms and what other types of supplies, materials, furniture could possibly be provided. There were some opportunities for us to, kind of, what are those things called? Some dividers in the classroom, some of the plexiglass screens for the classrooms and during assessments. So I think that's what we were talking about for furniture. There's some other pieces of furniture, but it was really about making sure the environment was safe and followed all the guidelines and protocol from the public health department. I don't know what this one means. It says hear from regarding our IEP. Talking about services in person, specifically APE, Adaptive Physical Education, I would like to know why this service can't be implemented in person sooner than later. APE cannot be done remotely and feel SDC classes are already small and meet all the CDC requirements. Similar question, we are moving towards finding out exactly what supports, when that order says supports, what can we possibly be providing in all of our special ed settings, given the new guidelines. How can wearing masks or having social distancing be implemented when some students either cannot or will not wear a mask and instruction is typically side by side and not 6 feet apart? Tough question. We do know and understand that some students are unable to and are unwilling to, or for whatever reason, not able to wear a mask and face covering. So we have to just follow the guidelines, the public health guidelines, and that is a requirement at this time. So then we have to have alternatives to how we provide that instruction. And it's right now, if it's remote, then that's what we need to do, but we're unable to not follow the public health guidelines. So even if we do have some in-person assessment or in-person learning, it's still a requirement for the face mask. Patrick, only questions that were answered can be viewed by the participants. Can you switch the Q&A? So I already answered that. We are going to print out these questions, all of them, and answer them. Does PUSD have a vision specialist yet, as we have not been reevaluated from our last triannual IEP and current contracts? VIs, visual impairments, are working on goals from a couple of years ago. You guys have an update on the vision specialists?
I do. We don't have an in-house vision specialist, but we do contract with a company that provides our teachers of the visually impaired. We've actually increased our staffing in that area this year. In July, the company provided us with a list of assessments broken down month by month, those that were past due and then on through the year. I've given that list to our program specialists to make sure that they communicate it out with the case managers to get those assessment plans signed so the assessments can be forthcoming.
Great. I'm looking at the time. We're over the time. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to continue, okay? I think we have a few more questions. I'm going to continue, probably go for another 10 minutes. We started a little bit late, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. And we thank you if you have to go. We appreciate your participation and your time today. So thank you again. Okay, I'm going to keep going here for another 5 to 10 minutes so we can try and answer some of these questions. Kids that have a one-to-one aid, where does this fit? So children that have a one-to-one aid, where does this fit when it comes to remote learning? Obviously, parents are now their one-to-one aid full-time.
Yes, but also the paraprofessionals should be logging on with the classroom teacher. So our classroom teachers can give the paraprofessionals access to the class. So when they log on for direct instruction, then the paraprofessional can log on at the same time. And so that would be the access given at the same time that the general education or special education teacher is online with the student. And there's also individual, if necessary, if the teacher is doing small group instruction and sets up chat rooms or other places for online for the students to go to, then they could set up the same groups for that assigned paraprofessional to go to work with that individual student, or their classroom paras in small groups. So all of that can be arranged online by giving access to the paraprofessionals during the same time that teacher is working with all the students.
Tony Thurman indicated in today's update that $5.3 billion was provided to school districts. How much funding is allocated to PUSD special education? Well,
I'm not the budget guru.
Yeah, I'd hate to guess on that. We're going to have to talk with our business office. Yeah, I'd hate to guess on that. So there's funding that we have annually, and then it sounds like there may be some additional funding based on the requirements while we're in remote learning. There may be other funding sources, so I'd hate to guess and give you guys a number that may not be correct. So we will follow up on that one. Let's see. For the longest time, it was thought that children could not get COVID, yet now they are the largest carriers as they may be asymptomatic. Okay, statement, sorry. I was looking for a question there. How will we be able to require students on site to instruct students? Sorry, let me reread that. It moved, Patrick's moving something, so it moved on. How will you be able to require teachers on site to instruct students when many of them have kids at home themselves that have not yet returned to on-site class instruction? Does not seem realistic for our dedicated staff who are already stretched super thin. Totally agree. It is difficult for everybody, and we're trying to be cognizant. One thing we've tried to do is we've offered opportunities for childcare. I guess I can kind of try to answer it that way. You know, we're realists too, that we do know that it is a juggling act for all of our families to have our kids at home, but also try and work. So, you know, we're trying our best to accommodate and provide as much as we can for those services. But we are offering, or we have offered, childcare for our staff. That's all district staff, to try and support some of those needs. How will you be able to require, I already read that, sorry. Okay, what about comp ed for students who did not receive services and or receive minimal services due to challenges of distance learning? Well, we'd like to talk about how we can resolve those issues prior. We want to make sure that our teachers are aware of what are the requirements, and then also to provide the services that, as I said earlier, our students are entitled to. So how that looks is a little bit different, but now again with some new guidance, we expect to again process and analyze that new guidance and provide some direction for our staff. Okay, why do SDC kids that are not provided with printed materials, general education, are being provided with these books, hands-on materials, but not SDC kids? The materials need to be provided also for our special education kids.
I would agree, and I think that's something that we need to start working on.
Yeah, I would totally agree. There should be, all materials should be provided to all of our students, and for students with special needs where we go above and beyond and provide more or different materials, accommodated, modified materials, there's no question that needs to be provided, absolutely. There are Zoom features called remote control and annotate, which enables a student to virtually write on screen. So for example, when a teacher pulls up a unique learning math worksheet, the student can answer it live by clicking on the screen. This does not work on Chromebooks. This is to clarify that other questions regarding Chromebook limitations. Oh, I did not know that. Jenny, are you, or Ken, you familiar with unique learning systems and their interaction with Chromebooks?
No, I am not on that format, no. Or
Yeah, I
platform.
definitely know that Chromebooks can be really iffy in terms of whether all the features work or not. Teachers, you're probably still hanging on there. If you have those issues, and then parents also, please communicate with your teachers. If there's something that we need to look at in terms of additional or different types of technology, please let us know that, because the only way that we know is if you tell us that it doesn't work. So I'm making a note of that, but I'd like to look further into that.
Yeah, we can work with some of our specialists who are experts on Google format, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. Okay, a couple of the next ones were just comments, so I'm going to skip those. Okay, these are just comments. What is the date of the current order allowing in-person support? I don't have the date. It just.
So the guidance for small cohorts just came out on the 25th. And so I have a SELPA meeting with other directors on Friday morning to discuss the guidance for small cohorts. And we're meeting as a SELPA to discuss and review that document.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, just a few more, you guys. Let me see, where am I? What specific measures are taken proactively to safeguard students' mental health needs? So I kind of talked about it in the presentation that we are working with our staff, counselors, psychologists, and so forth, and teachers to provide SEL curriculums, social emotional learning curriculum throughout the content, classroom content, but also we have resources still available for our students who are requiring some additional support. So as we said, if there are concerns about your student, we are trying our best to identify students that may have some needs, some additional mental health needs, but if you also are feeling like you need support for your student, please let your teacher know or your site administration know. I'm concerned about teachers unwilling to return in-person instruction. If a teacher is at high risk working, has their own concerns in an SDC class, how is this conflict handled by the district when the health department has now said in-person is allowed? Yeah, that's a good question. So as we have more and more guidance that allows for in-person work, whether again be assessments, small groups, more and more students coming onto campus, we are cognizant that we all have our own, limitations or health needs that may prevent us from doing some of that work. So we just need to work together with our staff and make sure that we follow all the legal procedures and requirements that we need to as an organization to work with our personnel. But again, we're trying to navigate both sides. I think it is a good question, but we're trying to navigate both sides. What are the things that are now allowed by public health? What can we do as a local district? And then how do we support both our staff and then also our students? So it's not easy. It's definitely not easy, but it's something that we need to push through and continue to work on as we try to provide some ongoing guidance. Okay, two more, okay? Let me see. There are students who need the remote control extension to help them learn and stay engaged. Can the district identify and assist families to download a Chrome extension for remote control? Technical question. I think some of those technical questions we will we'll have to reserve for the Q&A. Let's see. NPS. So NPS students are able to have one-on-one instruction. NPS is non-public school students. Have one-on-one instruction with their one-on-one aide by being assigned a breakout group during academic time. Will the district direct special ed teachers to set up breakout rooms so that students can get their instructional time via their one-on-one services?
So that is an excellent way to utilize paraprofessionals, and it is what we have recommended to our teachers who have asked, how are we supposed to utilize our paraprofessionals in this setting? So paraprofessionals definitely can provide support to our students in breakout rooms. They can do that with individual students or with small groups of students. The requirement though is that the teacher is the one that's directing the activities of the paraprofessional. Not that the paraprofessional has to plan a new lesson or that kind of thing. They are following through with the instruction as directed by their teacher.
Great. I think we've answered almost all the questions, probably about 70 questions, and I think we got through a lot of them. So I'll ask the last one. How does the district plan on addressing a student or anyone that has tested positive for COVID in a classroom? It's actually a good question. There are specific guidelines that are provided by Alameda County Public Health. And so we have those guidelines, and there's different scenarios that we have to implement in order to make sure that we follow those very specific guidelines. So if it's somebody, staff member or student were to be to test positive for COVID, then we have to alert the county public health department, and then they provide us guidance as to what the next steps will be. So whether we close a cohort or close a class, or what communications we have to do to follow up for that positive case, those are the things that the county public health will direct us and instruct us as to what the next steps are. But once we identify that there is a positive case for our school community, then it is our job to contact them, and then of course work with them to make sure that we follow all the procedures that they direct us to follow. Okay. All right, you guys, we're going to end it right there. We were over by about 15 minutes, but we had so many questions. I really want to take the opportunity to do that. I just want to say thank you for everybody that participated today. I want to thank Jenny Ricard, Ken Gokin, Patrick Gannon. I want to thank all of you for helping put this together, answer the questions. There are more questions that definitely we can answer. So we'll put together that Q&A. Like I said, we'll post it. This meeting has been recorded. We will post this meeting as well. And then Patrick did send the PDF version of the Q&A that we went through at the start of the meeting. Okay, so thank you guys for your participation. We want to wish you a rest of the day, a great rest of the day. It's 5 o'clock. I'm so used to having these meetings at night. I'm already thinking it's like 9 or 10 at night. So have a good rest of the day, and we hope to see you soon. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.